In this tutorial we'll be looking at arrays in computer programming, and in particular how we can use arrays in Swift version 2 and in Xcode. Now, arrays are a very important part of programming, and if you can learn how to use the different features within arrays, you can actually do a lot of things with your apps that you wouldn't normally be able to do using just standard programming that you've learned so far. As you can see from this image, an array is basically a location in memory where you store a variable. Now, this image here is quite accurate in depicting the structure of the array in memory. You have under here an address in memory, let's say RAM, in your random access memory, where you've got your registers, and each address location is assigned a number of bytes. Now, in this particular address, we've assigned the letter H, and in this particular address we've assigned the letter E. Now think of it in terms of addresses. Okay, so if you're delivering an article or a letter to someone, you need to specify the name of that person. On an envelope, you need to specify the address, the state, the postcode, and the country. Basically, that's what you're doing here. You're specifying a location in memory to send a particular item to in order to store it and then retrieve it so that you can use it or manipulate it. So it's quite a powerful feature to learn. So all of these letters in the word hello are stored in a particular address in computer memory, as you can see here. Now, you also have what's called an index for that array. Okay, so if I wanted to, for example, if I wanted to retrieve a part of an array, I could do so by calling the index. In this case, 0 will give me the letter H. Now, as an add-on to this tutorial, there is also what's called pointers, and we have discussed this briefly in previous tutorials, and I'll just touch on it briefly here before I go into more detail about it in a follow-up tutorial. But what I'll say is, just here and now while I have the opportunity, is that pointers are directed towards the actual address here. So if you wanted to retrieve something from memory, you can do so, but by using what's a pointer to an address. Okay, so let's say, for example, going back to our postal example, let's say I wanted to retrieve the name of a person living at a particular address. I can do so if I call the address, and then I can actually bring up the name of that person who lives at that address. And that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so it's a little bit to get your head around, but it's a reasonably straightforward way of storing variables in memory. Okay, now we'll move on to a playground's example of arrays in memory. What I have here is an example of an array. Now, the array This particular array is what's called mutable. In other words, I can change this array, and I can change it because I've declared it in Swift as a variable. So it's a variable, and the name that I've assigned to the variable is number list. Take note of how we use a capital second letter for the second word in that variable name. I have a colon followed by the array symbol, which is basically the braces, and then I've declared this array as an integer type. So you can declare arrays as integers or strings, but you need to do it in this way, in this structure. Okay. Then what I've done is I've assigned this array variable numbers 0 through to 9. Okay, which have then appeared on the right hand side of the screen. So that's just my integer array called number list. If I want to count the number of items in an array, what I can do is I can use the count function built into Swift to do that for me. It will count the number of items in that array. So how many items do I have in this array called number list? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so the 0 is actually included as an item in the array. Okay, so take note of the structure of how that works. You've got number list dot count, and my answer is 10. Now, if I wanted to, I could also print the items in an array, so I could see what I have in the array, and all I need to do that is to print, open brackets, type in the name of the variable, close the brackets, and it will display everything that's contained in the array. Here I have what's called an immutable array, and in contrast to a mutable array, which is changeable, an immutable array cannot be changed. It's declared as a constant, so we have let used instead of var, and let, we simply then go ahead and declare the constant second number list as an integer with the numbers 11 through to 20. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually add items to an array as well. So, as was the case in our number list, we had the numbers 0 through to 9, but let's just say that I wanted to add another item or element to that array. I can do so in Swift by calling the variable number list and dot append open brackets 10 will actually add the number 10 to my array. And of course the array now contains 11 items, including the number 0. And that's shown here on the right hand side. If I want to change the items in an array, I can do so by calling the variable number list and in the array specifying that the item 0 in the array needs to change or needs to become 11. And if I print the number list, it will show here that instead of a 0 appearing, I now have the number 11 appearing where the 0 was located. I can also use a selection statement, in this case binary selection statement, if else, to call the variable and check to see if it's empty and print if it's empty or not empty. Okay, so as we can see, the number list is checked using the isEmpty function, and it comes back with the response: no, the number list array is not empty. I can also create an array as a string, which is what I've done here, where I've declared the variable animal array and I've declared it as an empty string. Now, strings are a little bit different, and I'll show you some examples of that now. So if we want to check to see if the animal array string is empty, we can do so just like we did before with the number list. And as you can see, I've checked it to see if it's empty, and it prints empty. And that should be prints empty. So there's not much point having an empty array, so we want to add items to it. In this case, we want to add some strings to our animal array. So how do we do that? Well, we simply call the animal array string, and we put the plus sign preceding the equal sign, followed by the braces, and what we have is a quotation mark followed by the item, or the animal, dog, and a close of quotation marks followed by a comma, and then the same repeat for the remaining animals that I want to include in my array. I can now check to see if my array is empty, and of course, now that I've included animals in my array, the response is not empty. And I can check that by printing my array, print, open brackets, animal array, and on the right hand side, the items in the array are printed on the screen. I can also remove particular items in an array. So in the case of animal array, I can remove at index 3, remembering what I mentioned at the start of the tutorial about how the index can be used to remove and add items. And in this case, I've used the function remove at index 3 to remove the third item in the array. Now, because it's a string, I'll just go back to what we had on the screen just to show you. Okay, so in our array, okay, the index for dog will be 0, the index for cat will be 1, the index for fish will be 2, and the index for 3 will be bird. So by removing the third item in the index, I'm actually removing the third animal in the array, which is stored in memory, which is bird. And you can see that here on the screen because I'm left with dog, cat, and fish in the array. That should be dog, cat, and fish. So as you can see, arrays are a very, very useful tool in programming. So This is just an introduction to what you can do with arrays. There's a lot more to it, and the point of it is that you actually use this in your own apps that you'll be creating in term 2. So that you can use these to, for example, obtain information from the user input, store that in an array, and then extract elements from user input, and then be able to use that in whether it be calculations or whether it be responses to the user in an app. So hopefully that's helped you a bit with understanding how arrays work in Swift version 2, and we'll look at pointers and object-oriented programming and classes in more detail in some follow-up tutorials to help you understand how this all fits in with what we've been learning this semester.